Hi everyone, and welcome to our live democast, where very shortly we'll be talking about how Collibra and EOS Studio can work together. So my name's John Harrison, and I work with IDERA in our technical pre-sales team. So I do a lot of work with EOS Studio and our data modeling solutions, and I think it's really exciting to be able to show you some of the things that we have been doing more recently with the product to expand it out into different areas. And today, as we mentioned, we will focus very specifically on what we're doing with integrations to the Collibra toolset. In the background, I have one of my colleagues, Anil, who's going to be kind of just making sure that everything's running smoothly. As we go along, let me just bring that up there. You're very welcome to use the GoToWebinar chat and the question panel to give us some feedback and ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer those. Please try and keep them focused on the topic of the session today around Collibra. If there is some general questions and we've got a little bit of time, then we will try and answer those. But as I say, as you see things as we go through, if you think of a question, type it into the question pane or ask something in the chat window, then it's recorded for us, and we'll take a look at those as we go through and work our way through the session content. Okay, I think with that, we've gone a few minutes past the hour, so we'll make a start and get things going. So first of all, EOS Studio is IDERA's really flagship data modeling solution. It's been around in the industry for quite some time now, but it has developed quite considerably over that period of time, from just really a tool that can be used to model data artifacts into something a lot more in what it delivers today. So we very much position EOS Studio as an enterprise tool, and within that space it allows data architects to model the information that's important to an organization, and as well as modeling and documenting their data assets, it also assists them in designing those data assets and taking them forward. Now, more and more, what we are seeing as well is requirements for us to actually be able to integrate and support other products within the marketplace from within EOS Studio. And those can be kind of integrations into simple technologies, some of the cloud-based systems and so on that have came along, or more recently into some of the data governance type platforms such as Collibra, which is what we're going to talk through today. So really, what EOS Studio first of all does is allows you to take a look at what you might call your data or your raw data, and that could be in the form of a database. So it could be an RDBMS or a traditional data source like a SQL Server or an Oracle. These days it could be a NoSQL data source like a MongoDB, or it could be file-based. It could be a JSON file or something similar. So EOS Studio is able to kind of work with all of those raw data sources and help you transform those into more meaningful pieces of information by documenting them in the form of a data model. I've got a few more slides here which will talk a bit more around how our customers use that and utilize it to get value from the product set and to get value by transforming that data asset into more meaningful information. Before I get into that, I just want to do a quick checkpoint on what is EOS Studio itself. We're not going to go into this in great detail today because as I say, we're going to really focus on the Collibra integration. But EOS Studio itself is made up of something called EOS Studio Data Architect, and that's the left-hand side of the screen. And this is where we do our modeling. So we could do our creation of logical data models, physical data models. We can reverse engineer. We can generate SQL code or generate JSON schemas, all sorts of other really cool stuff. That's all done inside Data Architect. We can then store it in our team server repository, where we take care of things like version control, enable team working, allow people to share the data models and work with them effectively. And then also we have the ability to actually publish those data models. Now the publishing started off a good few versions back with EOS Studio as a way of sharing the contents of the data models to a wider audience. But again, more recently, what we've seen is a desire for that to really expand in what it can deliver. So the first thing we started to do was add in additional capabilities around a business glossary. So we're able to define business terms, group those together into business glossaries, also produce things like a simple data catalog of our data assets, and actually start linking those back to the data models themselves. And that was really quite cool, and it worked really well for a lot of our customers in terms of being able to help them document and start their journey around a data governance process. But then what really happened was things developed a bit further, and we started to get requests to say, well, these business glossaries, we're kind of capturing them in EOS Studio, but we've also got these things like Collibra out there, which are also managing them. So how do we kind of take that on board, and how do we work with that? And that's hopefully what we're going to explain to you in the session today. So some of these diagrams, there's quite a lot going on in them. Don't worry too much about the individual details. The slide deck is available as a download in the resource center on side GoToWebinar, so you can take those and download those and refer back to them. But really, with EOS Studio, what we're looking is to be able to have the ability to look at things at different levels of detail. So that could be at what's generally referred to as an enterprise conceptual model. We might then have that linking through into more of a logical model, where we're starting to add a bit more detail around what this actually means in terms of data assets, and then right down really to more of what's generally referred to as a project model or a physical model, where we're actually documenting how things are implemented down to a table and column basis, or down to a JSON schema basis as well. And what's key really is being able to manage those and also be able to define the linkages and relationships between them as well. How does an object called company at my conceptual level, how does that relate to my logical model? How does that refer to my physical or project model? And then moving on a step is, how does that refer to actually a higher level again in terms of how we document and define things for our business itself? And that's typically in the form of a business glossary with a set of business terms in there. So the green on the left-hand side of my diagram here is representing the typical contents of a business glossary. And again, what's very important is to be able to link those back into the more detailed documentation that's available as part of the data model. And of course, this can be more complicated in any kind of medium or large organization. It's very likely we're going to have multiple of these project or physical models that's out there. We might want to start reusing parts of those definitions in the form of things like domains and reusable attributes or reusable columns. We might want to start linking those up into how they fit into the enterprise-wide logical model. And of course, alongside all of that at the same time, is still continuing to map that back to the business glossary. And if we just kind of simplify that diagram a little bit, because this is now really what we're going to talk about in a bit more detail in terms of the demonstration itself, we're going to focus on how we can actually work with a business glossary, both in terms of EOS Studio and in terms of Collibra, how we can link that to our data models and understand how that might even link back through to physical representations, as I said, to the data assets themselves, right through to our data sources as well. So we'll take a look at how these different parts can fit together using a technology like EOS Studio, and how it makes that a whole lot easier to manage and work with. So if we look specifically at Collibra, I did glance at a couple of questions there just out the corner of my eye. And I saw there's one about synchronization and business terms and so on. So if you look a bit more specifically around Collibra and EOS Studio, The first thing is that this is a two-way, potentially bidirectional synchronization. So the information that we're capturing within EOS Studio and the information that we're capturing in Collibra can be merged and synchronized across both tool sets. You can designate things as a master source. So maybe that will be Collibra for your business terms. And maybe you're going to use things like the Collibra workflow engine for approvals and being able to kind of navigate through the workflow to, in essence, say this is now part of our production system, synchronize that back into the EOS Studio side of things, where you're actually able to navigate, browse, and understand how that fits in at a more technical layer alongside things like the logical and physical models. Okay, so again, we'll see this in the demonstration very shortly, but it can potentially be a two-way synchronization that takes place between the two tool sets here. Okay, what I'm going to do, bear with me, I'm just going to change over to my demo environment now. And I'm just going to make this full screen as well. And we're just going to take a look at a few things. Oh, bear with me a second. For some reason, very occasionally, VMware and GoToMeeting conspire against us and have a little bit of a confusion taking place when we change screen modes, but I think we sorted that out now. Now, I'm not going to spend very much time in terms of the building of data models today, but I did just want to bring a data model up inside EOS Studio Data Architect itself. So as mentioned, this is where we would actually create the data models. There's all sorts of deep functionality in here around layouts of the models, connecting to different data sources to reverse engineer them, bringing them in, generating code or generating JSON schemas from them, and so on. But the other thing that we have started to add, even within the EOS Studio Data Architect piece, is ways that our data architects working at this level can understand things like business terms and business definitions. So if I, for example, open up this object here called employee, there's a whole set of information that we're capturing here. I'm just going to jump around a couple. So, as you'd expect, we're going to see definitions of our attributes here, an employee number, employee type, surname, etc. Things like keys, relationships, all this good technical kind of ER modeling kind of information that we'd expect. But what you'll also start to see now as well is information that's surfacing from things like the business glossary and the business term definitions. So here I've actually linked my entity and table called employee, called emp at the physical layer, and said that this has got a tie back to these business terms called employee and employee number. And I can see the description of that coming back in here. I could add in additional terms. So by default there, it's just matching everything that begins with employee. So I can search for these. So these are all coming from the EOS Studio Team Server repository, which in turn is being synchronized with Collibra. So even as a data architect working within the modeling tool itself, within here, I'm able to go and navigate through and actually see and understand those higher level business definitions, and potentially, if I've got the right set of security profiles and security roles, add in additional business rules or link in additional business terms into the data model itself as well. So the main piece that we're really going to look at now is more around how we can actually make this available to a wider audience and how we can actually browse things such as the business glossaries and business terms in a slightly different way. So again, I'm just going to change across here to my demo screen here. So what we're looking at now is purely a web browser based view, okay? So once we have things like the data models Maybe we've imported or created the linkages to Collibra. We've populated things like the business glossaries and business terms. I can actually start to access these and look at this information purely from a web browser by connecting to the EOS Studio Team Server repository. So I don't need to install any software. The interface itself is a lot simpler than the data modeling tool is. So it's much more suitable for people who are perhaps more casual users who just want read-only access to be able to view the information, to be able to see that within here. I did just notice that there's a question in there around, will we record this? And apologies, I should have mentioned that at the start, but I will just clarify that now. Yes, the GoToWebinar is recording the session, and you should get an email afterwards just telling you the link where you can actually all download the recording from as well. So yes, that should absolutely be happening in the background for us. So what I'm looking at here, first of all, if you think back to that that first couple of slides that I showed, I appreciate that's probably a little bit of a memory test now. But I talked about being able to publish the data models, and that's what we're looking at here. So I've got what we call a model explorer, and I can see I've got different data models that have been published, things like a corporate logical model. I've got more specific data models that have been published. You know, this one's something that's been implemented at the physical layer on Snowflake. This one's been implemented at the physical layer on SQL Server. So if I know what I'm looking for in terms of a data model, I can come through here and I can start to explore it. In fact, we could if we wanted to, we could have kind of opened that up a bit more. If I hover over it, we'll get little thumbnails. And if I drill into this, we're going to get a representation of the data model itself. So this is the same one that we were looking at inside the data modeling tool. Now it is read-only, so I can't actually add attributes or add objects onto the data model, but I can zoom in, zoom out, I can take screenshots, I can save the images away, etc., etc. Okay, so I can use it to browse if I know what I'm looking for. So again, this is quite technical information. So if I drill into something like employee, again, I can see things like the attribute definitions, and all that's coming through from my data model, and so forth. Now, if we're looking at this from another perspective, and perhaps I'm not quite so sure what I'm looking for from a data modeling perspective, but I do know that I am interested in some key definitions. So, you know, from the business terms, I might say, well, I'm not sure where exactly it's used, but I'm quite interested in something called employee. So I could start kind of keying this in, drilling into it. It's going to start filtering and search matching that for me. I can filter it further, add more advanced searching and so on. And then eventually I can drill into that information that I want to see. So this is now a business term. So this is stored in the EOS Studio repository, but it's not part of the data model as such. The data model can link to it, as we saw, and create kind of a relationship to it so we can navigate through to it. But this is a high-level business definition. What's employee? Employee is part of our human resources glossary. It's a business term, and I'm logged in as the admin here, so I get to see a bit more technical information. And it's telling me that this is what it actually means. All of these fields that we're seeing here, these can all be customized. We can add additional custom properties. We can match these to what we have in Collibra, etc., such that I can kind of capture the information that's meaningful to the business. And we can also define things like owners and ownerships associated with this, this business term. And we can view this in different ways as well. So just to really explore a little bit around the navigation, I could ask it to say, well, is this business term related to any other business terms? Yep, it is. It's related to a department. It's related to a skill matrix. It's related to a contract. Can you be a bit more specific, or are there any business attributes that are defined around it? And yeah, we can see it links through to these particular objects here. And I think we might even see some parent types. Yeah, so an employee is actually a person which in turn is part of a party, and we can double click and navigate around all these items. And I can also then link back into the data models. So if I'm looking at my employee business term, I could then say, well, actually, let's have a look here. I want to see the actual data models where this has been implemented. And I want to know how this is implemented on my SQL Server database, and it's a table called EMP. And we'll come back to that in a moment, but again, I could click through that and work with it. Now, if you've probably got good eyesight, you might have noticed there's a little thing here up in the top here as well, which says open in Collibra. So this is kind of the first stage and what we've developed in terms of the integration with the Collibra toolset itself. So these business terms, such as employee, they can all be synchronized with Collibra, or they can be populated from Collibra in any catalogs that we have defined there already. And what I can also do is navigate directly to them. So maybe I'm looking at this employee term and thinking, actually, I do need to see the status of this as part of our overall workflow. So in my case, my session's timed out, so it's going to ask me to log back into my Collibra system, which is now done. And we're now looking at the Collibra interface. So here it's telling me that there's the definition of my employee. So it's a business term, and it's currently a candidate. The usual Collibra kind of options are available here, and you see that we've got it open as a task due for approval. You know, do we want to approve it or not? If so, what's our reasons? And also it does represent various things within our Collibra space as well. So we've got this linkage here from EOS Studio and Collibra, which, as I say, can be two-way, to allow us to really navigate through and understand where it's being utilized in the data models and ultimately our data assets and our implementations up through to that higher level and the workflow options available to us within Collibra. Because Collibra is a really cool tool. It's got lots of great functionality in there that we don't have, like the workflow operations, the approvals, and so on. But if we start trying to understand how things fit together, like I think EMP was one of the ones that we saw as part of the HR database on our SQL server, we're a little bit limited in terms of what we actually see in the overall context of where this fits inside Collibra. We can navigate some things and we can see that, you know, this is actually a table and it's got these particular columns in there. And I think there are some ways that I can kind of expand this out further, and I can look at things like how does this appear in terms of a diagram format. But again, in Collibra, it's fairly simplistic. It's really just showing us what's really applicable directly to that particular definition. So from our table, we're seeing that we have got these particular columns defined in there. We've got a table with the column members below it, etc. Again, we can click on these and can browse through to see the definitions and the and what they're actually representing in there. But we don't get that overall picture of what we see in EOS Studio. Because if you remember, if I jump back to my EOS Studio tab here, I'm actually seeing that there's that business term. So we've just been looking at that in Collibra, but I could actually browse through from Collibra, see this inside the EOS Studio model, and then actually go through and say, well, yeah, I can see it's part of that table here. So I'm going to have a look in more detail of that table. There's the columns, there's the description of it. Actually, let's see where it's used. How does that actually fit into the other table definitions in terms of a data model? So again, from here, what we're now seeing is we can navigate either way. You know, at the start, we navigated from this lower level up through to expose the business term, and now we've just gone the other way, kind of top down, where we've gone from a business term definition in Collibra through to being able to see the underlying implementation and detail of that behind the data models, and ultimately how they're implemented on particular platforms such as SQL Server or Snowflake or a JSON file and so on. And I think the other thing just to kind of point out, it's worth just showing this as well, is in terms of the integration itself, it's not a case of command line messing around with config files. So as part of the integration, we have actually got, if I'm the admin user, I can log into the Collibra integration tab here. I can set up links to my Collibra system. I can specify if I want a particular system to be the master. So in my case, it's Collibra, and also a default username, etc. Sorry, excuse me just a second. I'm just going to grab a quick drink of water. Sorry, it's kind of colds and cough seasons over here in England. It's very, very damp and not so nice. Anyway, back to the Collibra integration. So we've got our general tab here, just showing us things. We can also then go down into how we actually do the mappings between those. So I can map kind of specific Collibra domains back through to ports and models within EOS Studio. So I think in here, I'll see, that my particular EOS Studio data models could be mapped through a particular community inside Collibra as well. And I can decide various things like, do I want to update these manually? Maybe as the admin user, I want to be in control. So I want to say, yeah, I'm going to choose where I'm going to synchronize and take information from the logical model in terms of the tables, attributes, and entities and synchronize in. Or I can set them up to automatically sync or sync in the background and so on. So it's fairly straightforward, fairly easy to actually go through, set up the integration into Collibra, specify your kind of standard communities that you got defined in there, how they're going to link through to the models and objects that you have within the EOS Studio repository, and how they're going to synchronize with each other as well. I think again here we've got things like relationship mappings where we can define various objects in here as well around kind of how do business terms, how do asset types map, how are they impacted by, how they're related to. So lots of different options that we can play with in there as well. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick pause there as well, actually, and I'm going to have a look at, I think we had a few questions come through there, so I'm just going to see if I can quickly answer some of those. Let's just make that question box a little bit bigger so I can read it. So let's just start here. So a few general questions around in terms of the integration and security, or the is it the same password and login for Collibra and EOS Studio? At the moment, no, they are separate passwords. So we are working on things like a single server, single sign-on update for EOS Studio very soon. So that should be coming out a little bit later this year. Is Collibra, or can Collibra be packaged in with EOS Studio? Not currently. They are sold as separate solutions, and it's basically the integration that's included as part of EOS Studio that brings them together. So the integration, just as a bit of technical background, that is written by ourselves, though we do collaborate with Collibra quite closely on this. And it is written using the REST API that we actually publish into our backend repository. So what this means is it does also allow us to consider doing the same thing for other technologies going forward. And I think I've got a couple of little poll questions that I'll ask in just a moment around different technologies, as we are starting to get asked around other data governance platforms, data governance solutions. Will we be doing that kind of going forward? Yeah, can we update Collibra Sync for all models? Yes, we can. which version is this in? I think it was actually introduced in 19.1, I think. And I can see that Anil's very kindly going through and answering a lot of these questions as well in the background. So thanks for that, Anil. Anything else that looks interesting that it's worth me I'm just pulling out? Yeah, there's a few about the two-way stuff. Absolutely, it's two-way, so yes. How soon will it get reflected? Yeah, so as Anil said, it really depends on the infrastructure of the network. Probably not quite real time, but if you click on a update a term, that should immediately kick off an update into the Collibra side of things and vice versa. So it should be pretty instant. Anything else in there? And which ways? So which way is the sync recommended? Is it recommended to go from Collibra as the master or from your studio? To be honest, it depends a little bit on where you're coming from. One thing I haven't had time to show you today is that if you're really starting off with EOS Studio and you've got a nice logical model that's really well defined with lots of good definitions in there, but you maybe haven't done so much work on the business terms and business glossary side of things, we do have some functionality in there now called harvesting, where you can harvest the contents of the logical data model, take all the descriptions from the objects, and generate business terms directly from those. And you could then populate those into Collibra to give you a working set of business terms, which you can then start refining and working with. So if you're coming from that real deep data modeling side of things, maybe at least to start with, your studio is kind of driving things a bit more. If you're coming through from where you have got some well-defined business terms already, you want to be able to make sure you're managing those with any updates and how they get populated, then that's probably more from the Collibra side with its workflow engine and so on to manage, and then push those through into the EOS Studio side of things. In terms of where you might find information on how to configure this, so I did just show you the configuration screens that is documented in our doc wiki page, which I'll show you the links to in just a second. It should be fairly straightforward to do that. If you're familiar with Collibra and your studio, you'll be able to kind of understand the different terminology and basically decide what you're going to be syncing. Questions about what's actually included in the sync. It is mainly around the business glossaries. So as you saw, we can also synchronize some of the definitions from the logical model, such as kind of tables and so on. It doesn't really synchronize an ER type diagram itself directly. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to pull that into Collibra. This is still something that we're looking to further develop, though. It was, we had a good number of our larger customers who were really keen to get the integration in place and working, and we're still continuing to look at how we can refine this as we take it forward as well. Okay, again, I'm just going to pause for a quick second, and I'm going to try and do a couple of little polls here if this is going to work. So I'm just going to, first of all, just pause. Okay, so hopefully it's just doing a poll here at the moment, which is just basically saying, can you just give us an idea of, are you using Collibra at the moment? So is it live and running in your organization? Is it something you're maybe evaluating? Is it early days and you're just exploring, is it relevant to us? How we're going to use it? So I'll just leave that open for a second or two. You should just be able to click on the poll to respond to that, but a few people are responding in the chat, which is fine as well. This just helps us kind of understand a little bit about our user base, who's attending the webinars and so on. Okay, so I think that one's settling down now. So actually got a good number of you, well over 40%, 45%, have got Collibra in use at the moment, and quite a few others also actively evaluating. So, so that's interesting to see. So if I close that one down, I've got another one just about EOS Studio, because again, I'd be quite interested to understand how many of you have came along to using your studio and perhaps are looking at things like integration into Collibra. So it's the same question really, just this time it's, you know, are you using your studio already and actively doing that? Or are you evaluating it maybe with other data modeling tools, or are you just exploring things at the moment? Okay, and gotcha. I guess we kind of expect that because it's an EOS Studio kind of webinar. We've got quite a high number, over 70+% actively using EOS Studio. So thank you very much for that. And my final little poll, this is really just to check that you're all still here really and listening to me. As I said, we are kind of evaluating things as well, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. But is there other technologies like Purview, Elation, Informatica, or other things out there that perhaps you're looking at rather than Collibra? And again, I'll just give that a few seconds, give you a chance to click on these things. So I have to say that the feedback we're getting generally from speaking to our EOS Studio customers is there seems to be quite a strong surge on the Purview side of things, though Informatica's obviously got quite a solid base already out there. So I think in terms of roadmap planning, you know, we are looking at things like Purview, Informatica as other platforms to support going forward. Just a couple more still coming in, so I'll just leave that for a couple more seconds. Okay, so yeah, so actually interesting, Informatica's came out kind of quite strongly there, and then Purview. So okay, cool, interesting to know. Thank you very much for doing that. So what I'll do now, just for the last few minutes, and I'm letting Anil just keep an eye on the questions there in the background. If I think my screen should still be sharing. So just let me just pop this back up again to full screen and swap that around. I don't know why it always does that. Annoys me. So just as a quick summary here, you know, Collibra and integration into EOS Studio is a two-way synchronization, as we discussed. And the idea behind it really is using things like the business terms, business glossaries as a mechanism that's, you know, relevant both in Collibra and in EOS Studio, and be able to use the capability and functionality of EOS Studio to be able to take those business terms, link them into the logical and potentially physical data models that we store within our repository, link those back to the actual, you know, document flat files, databases that were coming in there, to be able to understand how those all relate and link together. So that gives us a much broader and bigger picture, while still being able to use the really nice features of things like Collibra as more of a data governance platform with its workflow approvals, and so on. I'm not going to read that out, so this is just really a kind of a quick summary of what it actually does. So it does allow things like the contents of logical and physical models to be uploaded to Collibra along with the business terms. Yeah, it will be synchronized, etc., etc. As I said, you can download the slides, so I'm not going to read all that one out. So other things I did just want to share is we do have an online doc wiki, and that's available to everyone. It's just a hosted website that we have. It's actually on docwiki.embarcadero.com for historical reasons, but that's got the most up-to-date versions of our documentation on there. It's got really good search capabilities, so that's a good place to go if you're trying to find how to configure something or how things work inside your studio or the Collibra integration. YouTube channel's got loads and loads of different little videos as well. There is actually some other videos on Collibra integration. I think we did a joint one a while back with representatives from Collibra as well as ourselves. So if you're interested in that, it might be worth taking a look upon the YouTube channel. And I did just want to give a little plug. I'm going to just do this from the browser directly, actually. If I share my screen here. Yeah, we are running these what we call live webinars or live demo casts, where we're kind of picking some specific little topics across all the different tool sets within IDERA. So you'll see things that are obviously all related to EOS Studio, others not so much. But one of my colleagues, Neil, is actually doing a really interesting session on Thursday this week around how EOS Studio can link in with data warehouse automation, and in particular with a tool set called Warescape, which is something that IDERA purchased a little while back as well. So take a look at the idera.com/events page. Lots and lots of different sessions coming up there. We aim to do an EOS Studio one really every couple of weeks, so they're free to attend, sign up, come along, and hopefully we'll see you there. And I think just in terms of looking to close off, I'm going to have a final look at a few of the questions that are coming in
John,
there. Then, oh, sorry.
Yeah. So John, one of the questions was, is there a way that if they were to accidentally update a term or something, is there like an instant rollback or something like a backup restore kind of option? I told them no, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
Okay. There's certainly on the EOS Studio side of things, there's not an automatic rollback, but if you update a business term, it will keep an audit trail of that update. So you could see what has changed, when it was changed, and who by, and you would see the previous value that it contained in there as well. So it would be a little bit of a manual thing to revert a business term back in EOS Studio, but it would be possible. Collibra, I have to say, I'm not 100% sure, but I would expect that because they've got the workflow engine in there, if you were to do a change in the Collibra side of things, update a business term, that's going to need some sort of approval and wind its way through the workflow channel and the approval process. So at any point there, that will be taking snapshots of what's happened and why it's been updated. So I'd think that would be able to be done within the Collibra side of things, but I'd have to confess I'd probably need to drill into that myself in a bit more detail.
Thanks, John.
Okay, so I think Anil's done a brilliant job of covering off most of the questions as they came in. So yeah, it's done brilliantly. So thanks for that, Anil. Thanks for your support in the background there.
You bet.
As I say,
Great questions.
thanks all. Yeah, brilliant questions, and it's really nice to see so many questions come in, because it does show that you are kind of hopefully interested and got some kind of good thoughts on how this may work and fit in with what you're doing in your organisations as well. So thanks all very much for attending and coming along. You should get a little email follow-up from our marketing team just with a link to the recording and other things very shortly. That normally comes soon in the next couple of days, I think. Otherwise, I think we'll finish there. And yeah, I'll just say thank you once again for attending, and have a great rest of your day.